For those familiar with history, they will know that the 1920s, for many, was a time of great prosperity. It was a time of innovation, invention, creativity, and new wealth. As we depart this decade and enter a new roaring 20s, let us remember many of the mistakes that we've made, many of the triumphs that we've had, and take lessons for the new year. This decade and the few years preceding it were a time of revolutionary insight. Ordinary citizens from around the world came together to demand that their voices be heard a lot better. It is important to remember that even the smallest individual has the potential to create the greatest history. We've seen seemingly ordinary individuals go through great lengths to make sure that they have had their stamp marked into the history books. Whether it's the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, an organization many have seen as archaic, elitist, and futile, or whether it's been the election of leaders such as Donald Trump and other leaders, left and right, who have espoused the ideology of populism and nationalism. Just like the 1920s, the previous few decades were marked by war and disunity. The Great War of 1914 to 1918 divided this world to unimaginable lengths. But during the 1920s, mankind came together in peace and relative goodwill to create a prosperous decade for many. As we enter a new decade, let us also remember the mistakes they made. For their prosperity, though great it was indeed short-lived. And we notice that as the next decade of the 1920s turned into the 1930s, or as some scholars would call it, the dirty 30s, of depression, of poverty, of strife, and misery. Let us remember the mistakes that were made back then, so that we don't repeat them, so that we can create, for as long as possible, a period of peace, prosperity, and goodwill. One of the mistakes that were made was the fact that the elite continued to not listen to the wills and the whims of the people. Though those decades and those times were very prosperous indeed, they were also a time when wealth and privilege was greatly divided. We must remember that those who may be smaller than us, those who may be more unfortunate, those who may not have quite the loud voice that you may have, still are creatures of God and still need to be respected as you should be respected. For as many humans and creatures of God live in the sanctimony of happiness and goodwill, the greater chance that collective goodwill and prosperity lingers on time after time. That is what the Christmas season is about. Coming together, giving to those, giving and not expecting to receive. That is what makes Christmas such a pleasant holiday. families, friends, loved ones coming together in a spirit of goodwill to give what they can, not necessarily expecting something in return, but giving to those they care about so that the harmony, the peace, the goodwill between mankind can linger for time to come. And we must remember that beyond our households, there is a great world of individuals, many of whom live in great poverty, who won't be having Christmas this year the way we know it. Many children around the world won't be having any presents. Many children and many families around the world won't have enough to eat, and their voices won't be heard. These problems may seem non-starters to us in our palaces of comfort, but those voices do matter. And if we've seen anything in this decade, the small voices have the ability to rise up and put their mark on history. So let us remember our fellow man. Disunity is not merely a bad thing, or not always a bad thing. Disunity brings out debate, understanding, lessons, learning from one another, what other people are thinking about, and those are positive things. Unity or collective unity doesn't always have to be positive. We've seen in dictatorships where the crowd steps in line collectively in unison or perceived unison, but they don't learn about their fellow man if they're not listening to their fellow man. And make no mistake, everyone is different in their mind. As we come together on this Christmas day and in the new year to come, let us remember these lessons and let us remember our fellow man. I wish you a happy Christmas and blessings in the new year.